Alhamdulillah, in the next chapter, Imam al-Bali rahimahullah ta'ala discusses earthly yields, or I should say zakat on earthly yields. Namely, we're talking about produce, what's harvested, also talking about honey, as well as mineral deposits that are extracted from the earth. To begin the chapter, he says zakat is obligatory upon every measured and stored item such as grains, staple foods, etc. So there's two qualities here you're looking for, measured and stored. Measured, whether it's a dry measure of that of volume, and then it's stored away over a duration of time. It could be something that's eaten. It could also be something that's not consumed, like saltwort seeds, and this is what you'll find in Muntaha or Shahr al-Muntaha. Various different types of seeds, also mentioned by Imam al-Bali. Leaves of shrubs or trees that are used like sidr, and also in this category is the zakat for dates that are not dried, raisins that are not dried, and other things like nuts. It says it's obligatory on all grains like wheat, oats, rice, garbanzo beans, sweet peas, lentils, lupins, and ervils, along with cotton, flax, basil, and cucumber seeds, but not for the likes of nutmeg, figs, grapes, or any other fruits like apples, amberella, pears, etc. So basically these things are these types of fruits are not, you're not liable to pay zakat on fruits. They do spoil, and they're also, they're not measured in the same way, but rather they're counted by piece. There are two prerequisites to pay a zakat on these items that are mentioned above. The first is to possess the nisab, as we know is the minimum threshold, which is 5 wusks after filtering the grains and drying the produce. So here, when you're going to determine your nisab, the nisab, by the way, as he says, is 5 wusks. That's approximately 122 kilograms or 70 US pounds for 1 wusk. So you'll multiply that by 5 times. You want to get a true weight, not the weight that is still the actual harvest still has some extra material on it, whether that's the husk or a part of the stalk or some of the dirt fertilizer that may still be on there, or something that is still very moist that needs to be dried out so that you're not measuring any excess water weight. You want to get a true measure in order to determine the actual weight of your harvest, in order to determine an accurate and true nisab. That is the first. Imam al-Bali discusses the wusk a little bit in detail. He says 1 wusk equals 60 sa'as, 1 sa' equals 5 and 1/3 Iraqian pounds, which is equivalent to 342 and 6/7 Damascus pounds. So all of this is rather theoretical. It's not applicable in our lives today. This must have been the standards of measurement during his time, and he was making them relevant to his community and students. And so in the footnotes, you'll find all of those measurements have been translated into what is usable today, liters, kilograms, pounds, grams, etc. The second prerequisite is possession at the time of liability. The time of liability, meaning when is it an obligation to pay the zakat, is, or I should say, when is zakat become obligatory? Well, that's when grains harden and produce ripens. Okay, so that's when you're in the possession of these grains or this produce while they are growing and they reach the, stage of maturity. Grains, they become hard and produce becomes ripe. Now zakat is an obligation, but it is not a fixed obligation. It is not determined, as he mentions, until they are placed on the threshing floor. So once all of that is harvested and then it is transported to, the threshing floor would be where you place things either to dry or you place to filter them and to prepare them to get to your true weight. That is when the zakat becomes a fixed obligation. Essentially meaning that from harvest until the threshing floor, the transportation in between, something could go wrong there. There could be a disaster, there could be a loss, there could be a fire, something could happen. And so long as it was not caused out of a terrible negligence, or of course even on purpose, then zakat would not be due on what was lost in transport between those two, the time of it becoming obligatory and the time when it is a fixed obligation. The next section of the chapter talks about manner of irrigation, and this does play a part, believe it or not, in how zakat is determined or calculated. He says 1/10 is obligatory for what has been effortlessly irrigated. Effortlessly irrigated here means rainwater. It means runoff water. It means fertile soil due to a neighboring river or body of water that may not be on your land or possibly could be. And also included in effortless irrigation is your initial revival or cultivation of the land, where you may have had to service the body of water. You may have had to define some irrigation canals or channels, or you may have had to work with a stream or a river in some way in order to bring back the vitality of the land. Because that's a one-time investment, perhaps a one-time action. It's not something that's going to be done over and over again. That is lumped together with what they consider effortless irrigation. And so whatever is produced by that effortless irrigation, the amount that is due is 1/10. Basically 10%. 1/2 of that, or 5%, for what was irrigated with effort. So now if you have to deal with irrigation systems, or back in the old days where they would use livestock, they would use cattle or other types of animals to carry bucket loads of water in order to irrigate the land, then 5% would be due, or 1/10. Or 1/2 of 1/10, 5%. And then 3/4, which would be like, 7.5%, 3/4 of 1/10, 7.5% of it for what was irrigated with a combination of the two. So if you had a combination of effortless irrigation, meaning rainwater, runoff water, etc., and then you had to supplement that with your irrigation system, then because of the combination there would be 3/4 of 1/10, or 7.5%. He says if they are equal, meaning the effortless irrigation versus the irrigation system, or that which required some effort, if they are equal, half and half, you did half here and half there, consideration is given to the method which yielded the greatest benefit and growth. If it is unknown, 1/10 is due. So of course that's to be considered when calculating the amount that is owed for zakat. Both the 1/10 and land tax are combined for taxable land, i.e. that which has been forcibly conquered and has not been divided among those who are due spoils besides Mecca and Egypt, like the Levant and Iraq. So here we're talking about a type of land which was conquered by the Muslim government, was, I should say, annexed, if you will. And the land was its usable land, and it was allowed to be harvested or cultivated, perhaps by those that previously owned it. And to maintain their harvest and usage of the land, they have to pay a land tax. And because they're paying the land tax, it does not negate the zakat on the produce or the harvest or whatever the earthly yield is. So just because you are working a taxable land, you have to pay the tax on that, doesn't nullify the zakat that's due on the yield that that piece of land produces. So both are applicable in this case, and that's essentially what this portion of the chapter is alluding to. Next, he talks about honey. 1/10 of honey is due, regardless if it was taken from uncultivated or owned land. Its nisab is 160 Iraqi pounds. 160 Iraqi pounds is approximately 61 kilos, or 135 U.S. pounds. So that's the amount of honey that you have to have cultivated, if you will. And it doesn't matter where you get it from. So you'll notice that here it's alluded to, and later it will be discussed in another book, in another chapter entirely, when it talks about uncultivated land, or what may be considered wasteland or dead earth. Like, for example, the peaks of the mountains, or on tops of the mountains, where that's not actually land that's cultivated and farmed, but it may be a place you'll find beehives. And so you can go and you can harvest honey from those beehives. Or it can be owned land that is used and that is cultivated. Regardless of where you harvest your honey, you have to pay the zakat so long as you have the nisab, and that amount is 1/10 of whatever you possess, so long as it reaches the nisab. The last section of the chapter here is whoever extracts the nisab of minerals after smelting and purification. So minerals here, minerals are referring to things like gold, referring to things like silver, like steel, like bronze, those types of things. It also refers to petroleum or salt, something that is extracted from the earth but is not the earth. It is essentially not its soil or its dirt or its bedrock, but it is something that is found underneath. And after all of that is extracted and smelted for metals and purified for other things, other substances, so that you can get, much like your harvest, you want a true nisab. You don't want to be, for example, gold and silver and bronze and those things. They may be adulterated with other minerals that need to be extracted, and so they're smelted. They're essentially purified so that you can arrive at the true weight of that particular mineral, as opposed to a combination of things. And that's the purification process. He says it's obliged to give 2.5% immediately. So once that's completed and you have it in your possession, you need to give 2.5% of that. Lastly, here we're talking about buried treasure, which is known as rikaz. And buried treasure is typically referring to something that is before the time of Islam, or the buried treasure of non-Muslims. And that is zakatable wealth. 1/5 of it is due. Even if it is scant in amount, it can be a meager amount that is found, it must be paid. And so this buried treasure is not just any old treasure. If it's a treasure that has the marking of Muslims on it, then it's considered, or it has to be treated as lost property. And if it's unknown, it has no marking of the Muslims in particular, then it's also treated as lost property. And the owner, there's a process in which you go through to try and reconnect the owner to their lost property. But if it's clearly something from the, as I said, pre-Islamic days of the previous nations that came before, it's clearly marked, then this is buried treasure that is to be treated like fay, meaning that whatever is paid of the zakat is to be treated like fay, and fay is war booty acquired without military action. So what you pay from that rikaz, the zakat you pay on that buried treasure, will be treated in a certain manner. And then whatever remains of the treasure, it belongs to its finder, even if they are an employee, so long as they're not hired to search for it. Basically what that means is, if you're an employee and you're out cultivating the land, or you're out digging around, perhaps building a home, and you're digging the foundation, or you're digging the irrigation system or something, and you stumble upon some buried treasure, that is rikaz, that you stumble upon this treasure, it technically belongs to you as the finder, unless you were employed to find treasure. You were hunting for buried treasure. If you were employed for that purpose, then you're getting compensated for actually finding it, and what you do happen to find is the property of your employer, and they would be obliged to pay the zakat on that treasure that he casts. And that concludes the chapter.